So, how can we fight back against the radical left, their newfound confidence to openly call for violence, or at least veiled calls for violence, using terms like direct action, resistance, and decolonization, which we know are just euphemisms that mean violence and in some cases even mass murder? I wanted to bring in my friend and colleague Rupa Subramanya to have a discussion on this topic. Rupa, I don't know if we always agree, especially on this issue, but I always really respect your position and the research and the thought that goes into it. So a couple of weeks ago on Twitter, there was a sort of brouhaha over a column by Warren Kinsella. He basically pointed to some of the very vicious pro-Hamas rallies and some of the sort of more vocal people that were more or less calling for genocide. And in his original tweet, he wrote this: again, if they're here on a visa or do not have citizenship, deport them. If they have citizenship, charge them. I think that they deleted that tweet and changed the headline a little bit, watered it down a little bit. I believe that the latest version of the headline said, charge them, prosecute them, convict them, and then jail them. Either way, Ben Mulroney, who is the son of former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, and he's a sort of well-known TV host in Canada, he quote tweeted Warren Kinsella, or quote posted and wrote, "Oh, I co-sign this." And you sort of took issue to it and said, you know, I don't like the fact that people's civil liberties could potentially be violated. We're talking about deporting people just because we don't like their views. So I'm wondering if you could sort of expand on your thinking and talk about why you do not think we should deport people who promote and celebrate mass murder.
Well, first of all, I mean, let's unpack what you said. I mean, you're asserting they're celebrating mass murder. All of these things are up for interpretation. They're highly, highly contested. Your view may be that they're calling for mass murder. I've been to 3 of these rallies here in Ottawa. There are people who, there are all kinds of people who are part of this movement, including people who are calling for mass murder. I'm not denying that. But let's stipulate for the sake of argument that saying river to the sea or free Palestine is inciting violence. Now, that falls under criminal law and should be prosecuted as such. That's my opinion. There is no legal or ethical basis for deportation on such grounds that I'm aware of. It would be, first of all, it would be unconstitutional. And this is the kind of stuff that happens in totalitarian countries in the Middle East, countries like China, where you question the state or you question Islam, for example. I've lived in some of these places. You do get deported for crossing that red line, and the red line in these countries happens to be these things. I personally don't want to go there. I'm a free speech absolutist, but I want to make it clear that incitement to violence is where there's a clear red line for me there. So, for example, if you tell someone to go, buy a gun and tell them to go and kill a bunch of people, that is not protected speech anywhere that I'm aware of, neither in the US nor in Canada. But we get into more difficult terrain, in my opinion, when it comes to expressions such as from the river to the sea and free Palestine. Now, on one reading of it, it would seem like this is a call for the destruction of Israel, and this would not be considered protected speech. However, another reading is that this is just a trope or a refrain used on behalf of the Palestinian cause that goes back several decades. It is even used by entities such as the Palestinian Authority, which does not call for the destruction of Israel. It does not wish to annihilate Israel off the map. So it would be a stretch to say that this is an incitement to violence for someone to take up arms against the state of Israel. Now, I want to point to I don't know how much you want to go into this, but, Candice, you and I spoke earlier about how this is a battle for civilization, in a sense. I don't know if you want to go into that, but I'm happy to talk about it. But those are roughly, yeah.
Well, we can get into that in a minute, Rupa, because I just want to pick up on what you said. Look, I don't think that Canada is immune from going down a totalitarian path. I think that we saw glimpses of that during COVID and with the trucker convoy and Trudeau just sort of quashing a protest simply because he doesn't like it. So I am with you on this. I think that we need to preserve the right to peaceful assembly, the right to protest, and the right to free speech. Those are absolute cornerstones of our society. But when we're talking about the difference between a country like Canada, which is an open, diverse, tolerant, pluralistic society, we come across a sort of fundamental problem. I think it's an existential problem when we also pair that with mass unchecked immigration. So people are allowed to come from anywhere in the world. We don't screen for ideology. We don't screen for values. So for all we know, of the people coming to Canada, they could all be fervent crazed Jew haters. They could hate gay people and want to, implement some kind of a law where we kill these people, right? And so it's like sooner or later in a liberal democracy like Canada, we're going to have to deal with the problem that many people around the world hold views that are simply incompatible with the West. And I do believe it's a civilizational struggle. I think that Canada's made a lot of problems when it comes to just allowing anybody to come in. And then on top of that, you have this festering ideologies on college campuses, as I mentioned previously in the show, terms like decolonization, which people will openly say it means mass violence. It means massacres like October 7th. So again, not to just simply repeat the question, but I'm wondering if you could get into like how does a country like Canada preserve pluralism while also maintaining the freedoms? Because I think that these people will happily use our freedoms against us. They don't actually believe in free speech, Rupa, because as soon as it comes to people who criticize Islam, criticize the Prophet, criticize even Hamas leaders. We saw a Washington Post cartoon taken down a couple weeks ago because it was offensive to Hamas leaders. They're happy to use that sword against us, but then at the same time, when it suits them, they're going to drape themselves in the veil of we deserve free speech, we deserve peaceful protests, or the right to free assembly. They don't actually hold those values. So how do we deal with that?
Well, we have to deal with it because it goes back to the fundamental tenets of Western civilization. Before I get into that, I want to address the values thing of, when it comes to citizenship. I'm inclined to agree with you. I don't think we should be allowing people who want to come to Canada and want to implement Sharia law, for example. That's not the direction in which we want to go. If, for example, I think the U.S., as far as I am aware, expects you to sign saying that you don't belong to a communist party or a Nazi party or something to that effect. So yes, I think we could develop something along those lines for sure. So we're in agreement there. But how do we preserve this now? A lot of people have talked about this in terms of a civilizational battle, what is happening in the Middle East, but it's also that term has also been used in the context of free speech. A clash of civilization, as Samuel Huntington put it, and so therefore we must suppress views that we don't like. I think that by going down that route, we're actually undermining a core Western value that goes back to the Enlightenment, which is free and open debate. You might find that kind of speech deplorable and repugnant, and I find that absolutely to be the case. But free speech is not about liking something or upholding the rights of views that we agree with. It comes down to protecting views that we disagree with. And that's the fundamental litmus test of free speech of any civilized society. I want to talk about civilization. Why is this important? Why is this a fundamental core of Western civilization? Well, our Western civilization was founded on two sets of ideas and cultures. One was Greece and Rome, and the other was the Judeo-Christian heritage. So Greece and Rome, all of the knowledge and antiquity accomplishments during classical antiquity, and then the Judeo-Christian heritage. And then the Renaissance happened, which rediscovered the glories of Greece and Rome. And then you had the Protestant Reformation. And then finally, the Enlightenment of the 18th century, which included thinkers across Europe like Voltaire in France, Immanuel Kant in Germany, David Hume and Adam Smith in Great Britain. But here's the crux, and this is why this is so important. all of these thinkers of the Enlightenment agreed on one thing, which is free, open, and civilized and rational debate. This was one of the fundamental tenets of a free, open, and liberal society. They look at what happened to Galileo, who was persecuted by the Catholic Church for saying that the earth revolved around the sun, and he had to recant his view just to save his life. Let me remind you, all of this was happening in the context of the 18th century, which witnessed horrific wars and revolutions, notably the Revolutionary War in the U.S., in 1776, and then you had the as a consequence of that, you had the First Amendment in the U.S., which offers the most robust protection for free speech anywhere in the world, and then you had the French Revolution of 1789 and beyond, which saw the high ideals of revolutionaries, which was liberté, égalité, and fraternité, subverted by a brutal dictator named Napoleon. The Enlightenment thinkers like David Hume, Adam Smith, John Stuart Mill, then you go into the 20th century like Friedrich von Hayek and Milton Friedman, all of my heroes, put freedom of expression as a core fundamental value for any free and civilized society. So our Western civilization, as we know it right now, has been refracted through evolution over the centuries in one that prizes public reasoning based on free, open, and civilized debate as a way to discuss and resolve problems of public policy. So in the context of the current situation where you have these pro-Palestinian rallies, I think it'd be absolutely detrimental to suppress these voices, because all it's going to do is it's just going to move the stuff underground. We've seen this play out over and over again. Just look at what is happening in Germany right now. They banned pro-Palestinian protests. Has that reduced the number of anti-Semitic attacks? Can someone actually say that is happening? It hasn't. In fact, it's gotten worse.
It's certainly a Band-Aid. It's a remedy. And I'll agree with you on that, Rupa. I just want to jump in, though, because I agree with you on the value of the Enlightenment and those great thinkers that you mentioned. I'll just say that they all had a foundational and fundamental agreement, whether they wrote about it or not, whether they believe themselves to be theists or atheists or Christians. They all held a fundamental ideal of what it meant to be a citizen, what it meant to contribute, what it meant to be an equal member of society. And what I worry about, what I see today, is that we don't share that foundational belief, that foundational belief has been torn apart and ripped apart, that we don't have the same basis starting point. And I agree that sometimes these bans, these ad hoc bans, aren't necessarily fixing the root of the problem. And I worry that root of the problem is so far gone that I don't know how we can repair it, starting by saying, look, we have these core values that we all have to agree on. I think that might be a first step in helping. But I agree that you need to be able to think, you need to be able to critique the system, and that's all happening. But I fear, and another example of this was the viral TikTok trend that we saw last week of young Americans talking about Osama bin Laden and their reverence for him and his letter to America and how it's changed their world and they're having an existential crisis. It's like when we don't have a core belief, when we don't have a message that unites our society, that tells us tells a story to ourselves about why we're here, why what we're doing is important, why we all share, a collective belief, which is something that they did have in the Enlightenment. I worry that we don't have that now. And so we're trying to preserve freedom of speech, but it's actually freedom of speech is one of the things that's helping to sort of unravel our whole civilization.
We do have it. I disagree with you there. We do have all of the core values with us. It's just that we as in not you and I, because I think you and I have consistently stood up for individual liberties and freedom and that sort of thing. But Western society, at least over the last 10 years or so, has taken a wrong turn. For the last few years, it was the left, the progressive left, that presided over a culture of canceling people for views that they disagreed with, and especially so here in Canada. But all we can do right now is to continue to uphold these rights, values, stand up for them every single time that it is under threat. And that is my battle, right? I see the free speech debate, the free expression debate. I see all of these things in an abstract way. For me, it is not specific to a certain crisis, not specific to a certain issue. It is in an abstract way. I look at these things, and it is not an emotional issue for me. I look at it in a clinical kind of way. Is this actually going to get us more freedom? And look what happened during the pandemic, right? That wasn't too long ago. The pandemic was sold to us as an existential crisis. You don't abide by these restrictions, you don't abide by these lockdowns, we're all going to die. That was basically the messaging from our public health authorities. Some of us, including myself, momentarily believed that messaging, and I regret that to this very day. And so there was this mass justification for the curtailment of our civil liberties in peacetime. It was imposed on us, saying this was an emergency. Doctors who dissented were canceled and fired. And then you saw the Freedom Convoy, and people who supported the convoy had their bank accounts frozen. It was an Orwellian reaction by the state, and I fear that we are repeating the same mistake here. I find many of the things that are being said at these protests absolutely abhorrent. By the way, let me point this out. None of this is new. We are only waking up to this problem now. I remember walking in downtown Ottawa 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. There was another protest reacting to something that was happening in between Israel and Hamas, and everybody was chanting from the river to the sea, free Palestine, and so on and so forth, Intifada, and all of that stuff. There was absolutely no debate. There was no attention paid to this issue. None of this is new. My point is that we have to allow this to, we have to allow views that we find absolutely abhorrent. We have to allow that, because it is not you're not going to destroy Hamas ideology or radical Islam or any of the things that we find absolutely abhorrent. We're not going to destroy that by suppressing someone else's right to express that freely. It's not going to go away that way. I think the only way we can do that is through debate. And even if the other party does not engage in debate, we must insist on upholding the right to free speech.
Okay, I definitely see where you're coming from, and I appreciate your defense of the sort of basis of freedom of speech and fighting against sort of tyrannical government. I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions, because I know you said that a lot of it is up for interpretation. So from the river to the sea, it's nuanced, perhaps, and you could say that it doesn't mean what we think it means. But some of the words we've been seeing more and more, right? So just sort of rapid fire here. If someone calls for jihad, do you think that that's a call for violence?
Again, it's, this is a discussion I had with a senior official in the UK when I was working on my free speech in the UK story last week, and we had this very same conversation. Now he's, said that he wants to basically see these protests banned, but even he had to concede. It's hard to, from a legal perspective, it really is hard. Everything is context specific, right? Jihad, a Muslim will tell you it is an internal battle, but we also know that it means, it could potentially mean pick up.
I think most Muslims won't say that, Rupa. I think most Muslims will say that jihad has long been understood to mean a physical battle.
I don't know. I mean, the Muslims that I have interacted, I've lived in the Middle East. It is up for interpretation, just like Intifada. Intifada again has been. It means resistance. It means a resistance or opposition. Nobody had any problems using the word Intifada in the context of the Arab Spring. You see, the thing is, even having said all of that, you and I can disagree on what these things actually mean. My point is that it is still, as far as I'm concerned, it is still protected speech. If there's active support for a terrorist cause, material support for a terrorist cause, let's take the Khalistani problem for a second. There are people in Canada, in our cities, who take out floats and parades glorifying Khalistani terrorists as martyrs. I find that absolutely repugnant. It makes me sick when I see that. But I uphold their right to free expression as long as they're doing it peacefully, as long as they're
including the mastermind of the Air India bombing. You think if someone's holding up a banner
they are
of the
doing
mastermind of the Air
they
India
are
bombing,
doing that.
that's protected speech.
They are doing that. They are doing that. I mean, they are absolutely doing that. I'm a free speech absolutist. I find it distasteful and repugnant. Again, it goes back to the core value of Western civilization, which is what I care about. It is, for me, the litmus test of free speech really is not if you agree with someone, but if you strongly disagree with someone and you respect their right to speak freely. That's the litmus test for a civilized society. And I've lived in repressive societies where, things are interpreted differently by someone who wants to come after you. And I've faced the consequences of that. And I've seen others face the consequences of that. And we are going down a slippery slope here in Canada. We came very close to being a totalitarian society under the pandemic. And I do not want us to go down the same path.
Okay, I think that's a great place to leave it. Rupa, Subramanya, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for your insights. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is The Candice Malcolm Show.